Hello, everyone. It's your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and welcome to another episode of Wavelengths, an Amphenol Broadband Solutions podcast. If you're tuning into today's episode, alert, alert, you're tapping into a part 2 of 2. So if you missed part 1 of our conversation with our guest, Allen Proithis, you're going to want to go ahead and pause here, go listen to part 1, and then loop back around. But if you've already heard part 1, then welcome back to our conversation here on the wireless revolution and how it is shaping and reshaping the broadband industry. So on this episode of Wavelengths, we've been discussing how the foundational next-gen wireless technologies, namely Wi-Fi 6 and 6E and 5G and a little bit of 6G, how they are sort of reshaping the foundations of services, solutions, innovative use cases for wireless broadband, and then how that is impacting broadband companies and players at large. How should they strategize around these changes and make the most of these innovative use cases that are taking place in smart agriculture, manufacturing, smart cities, you name it, right? So now we're going to pick back up where we left off and talk a little bit more about these technologies in an IoT context, because IoT and Industry 4.0 at large is really at the forefront of validating some of the use cases for various different wireless broadband networks. We're also going to learn a little bit more about GXC's cellular mesh solutions and how they fit into this evolving ecosystem. So coming back for more, because he couldn't get enough, is Mr. Allen Proithis, CEO of GXC. Allen, thanks for coming back for part 2, man. How you doing?
Well, thanks for having me for this wireless mini-series here, Daniel.
Yeah, we didn't intend it to be a mini-series, but there's just too much to talk about. So 2 parts it is. But yeah, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you rejoining us and digging in a little bit more. So let's go ahead and jump back in. What I want to do now is talk about, we've kind of already been talking about this, but the application of those networks in one of the sort of, leading initiatives shaping how wireless broadband providers, approach their services, and, one of these buckets of change that are defining Industry 4.0. And that would just be the proliferation of IoT ecosystems and IoT technologies, public ones, private ones, all that good stuff. So I want to highlight another few stats here just to sort of set the stage. But we'll start with the technology itself for IoT, because I'm curious how you see it interacting with the ecosystem of next-gen wireless networks. So, when IoT first started taking off in the early 2010s, it was 2G and 3G that dominated sort of the network infrastructure for it. But as of, about 2019, it's actually NB IoT that now leads, with 4G kind of in second and 5G inching up. And this is just for cellular IoT modules. This is data coming out of IoTanalytics.com, if folks want to reference it. What are your thoughts there? How is NB IoT, as a foundational ecosystem comparing to trying to connect IoT over Wi-Fi 6, over 5G, over preparing it for 6G, or even just sticking with 4G, and how is that defining how wireless broadband providers are maneuvering the IoT ecosystem as it evolves?
So again, the answer depends upon the use case and how much data the device is generating. The majority of IoT devices actually don't crank out that much data. And so what drives someone to a cellular connectivity solution versus a non-cellular connectivity solution, not just Wi-Fi, but like LoRa is probably the best non-cellular, lower data solution. It's about equivalent to NB IoT in terms of the data it can support. But you have batteries that can last for many years, and it's a more inexpensive protocol to deploy. But where cellular really shines is when things move around a lot, because you're always going to have a cellular network. And really the industry started really going down the NB IoT path, really to balance out the threat coming from non-cellular technologies like LoRa and some others. But once they started getting out there, they started falling back more on CAT-M than NB IoT. And because CAT-M, the coverage is much more ubiquitous, the costs have really come down. So it's going to be incredibly competitive with almost every other technology, and because it's everywhere. but again, it's really about the movement of stuff, and even the answer whether stuff's roaming within a city, a state, a country, a region. The answer changes very quickly because even though it still may be cellular, the bands you have to support around the world change with cellular as well. There's no like, it's not like Bluetooth. Anywhere you go on Bluetooth, it's going to run 2.4. It's one of the very few things. Once you get into all these other things, there'll always be some overlap, but then you have to support multi-bands based on, where you're going. So that's why people a lot of times for like campus low data stuff, you'll have like a LoRa type of technology, which is the perfect technology for a lot of this low data stuff because the batteries just last and last for many years. You can gather stuff up. And frankly, that's where private cellular really shines because what you can do is you can have all that data, you can have a master umbrella network over a campus. So all your data from that corporate app you're walking around on, inside, outside, seamless roaming on your own network that you keep the data. And then let's say you have a bunch of legacy Wi-Fi stuff, LoRa stuff, Bluetooth stuff, whatever it is, doesn't matter. By the use of gateways, you can have all that still use the overlying umbrella private cellular network as backhaul for all that. So you still keep it within your own house before you take it somewhere else. And then finally, for things that need to move around outside of that campus, because you have a cellular capability built in certain things, you can have it so it can roam onto public networks if you wanted to do so, or roam between other private networks. And so again, it comes down to a really good use case definition and figure out how it works all together.
And, we're seeing the IoT market continue to grow, including despite some economic downturns over the last year or so. And the share of where, that market is growing is also pretty diverse, right? IoT hardware, services, software, and even IoT security is carving out a significant slice and appears to continue to carve out a significant slice through at least 2027. So this IoT revolution isn't slowing down, right? And we're starting to see different approaches to, like you were saying, defining that IoT ecosystem. There's another very high profile one that I want to get your thoughts on, but that's Amazon Sidewalk, which is operating its own low bandwidth long range wireless network. It's a 900 megahertz spectrum. Where do you see that kind of network technology fitting into the rest of the wireless revolution? And is that an example, in your opinion, of a quality sort of private deployment of an IoT ecosystem? And what can we learn from seeing this launched at scale?
So two questions there. One about industry growth, one about Sidewalk. So the first one about growth. I make the joke of, remember about 20 years ago, if you're old enough, when people were hiring the head of internet. And then, about 7, 8 years ago, people were hiring the head of IoT. And we sort of are getting through the phase of hiring the head of digital, whatever that means. Because what happens is, we don't have a head of Wi-Fi. We don't have a head of, Intel CPU machines in your office. They're just one tool in the bag that you're applying to your business, and you become familiar enough with it where it's not its own thing, it's how it really works with everything else. Some of the best industry stats, IoT analytics guys do a nice job. One of my favorites is actually the Transformer Insight guys in the UK. They've been around forever, really understand this. I was just having a conversation with them recently because there is no hockey stick in IoT. It's the kind of thing that'll grow at about 15% a year till the end of time. And there'll be verticals and segments and use cases that'll hockey stick. But overall, for everything, is just going to keep steadily growing because with COVID and automation and digital transformation, however we define it, you just need more data to control stuff. And that's what IoT is in the end of the day. So I think you'll see a very above average growth rate, but it's not going to be like one day it doubles. It's going to be a very steady 15-ish% across the whole market with pockets of spurts that continue to grow. Regarding the Amazon stuff, it's interesting because it's been around a number of years now. They were actually based it originally on the LoRa technology. and they're using the ISM band, which in the US is in the low 900s, which anybody can, again, it's a shared band. In Europe, it's 868 and works similarly. And they took the LoRa technology and they tweaked it a little bit, and they started baking it in all their consumer products. So if you have a Ring doorbell, if you have a smart speaker, its default is that it's on. So you basically have multiple networks spaced in. And so because they sell so many units, they've created this really impressive network. But the network is basically what I'd call an inside-out network. It's not like a big macro network where you're driving on a highway, you're going to have coverage. It's a network based on the installed footprint of all their existing products. And so I think they're getting very aggressive finally in terms of making it available for people to use. And so I think it's something worthy of a hard look. But the question then becomes what use cases are best suited for it if it's basically all tagging on like in-home devices. How do you get coverage around enterprise? How do you get coverage out in the wild? And I know they are looking at quite a few things and coming up with, their own gateways you can deploy and things like that. But they did such a good job on the inside deployment. It'll be interesting to see what they do on the outside deployment. And today also, I think they started by deploying it. Anybody can use it for free, which is great. In a new gas station event on the street last month, you got free coffee for 2 weeks. But after that, the free coffee goes away. And so the question is, when does the free coffee go away on the Sidewalk network? And I just don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, it's still in a pretty nascent stage. So it's going to be curious to see how, their iteration of a low, a low bandwidth, long range, private wireless network, seeing how that's going to develop and either set standards or, be examples for, how to iterate on that approach moving forward by other players that want to develop their own private, long range, low bandwidth networks.
Yeah, and by the way, the LoRa standard and the modified Sidewalk standard does go a long way. All those kind of, because ISM band, it's lower since it's 900 megahertz. So, you put an antenna on the roof of your house, you're going to get probably a mile or two out of that easy. But who's going to climb on the roof, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's another layer too, right? The community involvement. Will that be a good motivator for launching and sustaining these networks at scale? I'd like to think yes. I'm typically community-oriented solutions. I don't know. I'm just talking kind of esoterically, but they are pretty successful. They create some sort of shared ownership and vision for how to make the most out of a technology, a whatever. But in practice, we'll have to see, if that approach works.
Well, what does that even mean, right? When you have a community-oriented solution. I mean, I was a beta user on Ring before Amazon ever bought them, and I still get those weird Ring notifications about, somebody lost a dog in your neighborhood. I'm like, okay, how's that my problem? I'll keep my eye out for Spot, but what am I supposed to do about that? It seems like the granularity or the filtering isn't there. On the flip side, though, everybody has sort of a crowdsourced network that's providing some level of neighborhood coverage pretty well. And what if you started putting up these little battery operated panic buttons, in certain neighborhoods where you knew exactly where that alert was coming from, alerted the police, alerted neighbors, gunshot detectors, the analysis that can happen now, even some of the audio stuff, if a crash happens or a scream. So you can do all kinds of cool stuff once you have this kind of network with enough density, but you got to sort of prime the pump a little bit.
All right, Alan, we're approaching the end of the conversation here. I want to take some time to really focus in on GXC here and its place in the varied ecosystem of wireless networks. So GXC offers a cellular mesh technology, which is pretty unique in the marketplace. It's a private cellular solution for enterprises. Can you explain some of the differences here, right, between a cellular mesh network and some of the other next-gen wireless technologies that are shaping the broadband industry?
Sure thing. And first off, we're one of the only providers, one of the very, very few that have a turnkey private cellular solution. So in most cases, and there's a lot of good individual gear. You buy a gateway here, you buy the so different chunks of software you need to control it from other places. But then you have to integrate it, and then what happens? You have to scale it. It's not really designed for enterprise to scale. And so first off, we have a turnkey system. Everything's pre-integrated, ready to rock. You put up a couple of lunch boxes with antennas, and you're rocking and rolling, basically. And then on the mesh side, we're the only people in the world that have a mesh cellular technology. So it's sort of like at home now that any Wi-Fi you buy for your house, you have one box you plug in your backhaul to, and then the other box is just plug in the power. And that's what we can do with cellular, because if you think about how much it costs to extend fiber for backhaul in some situations, whether it's in a big industrial building, a campus, think about a port that's running 24/7. You're not going to get a backhoe in and dig across, a couple football fields of concrete just to run fiber. It's cost prohibitive. It's disruptive to the business. So basically, the core network will deploy with traditional backhaul where you already have it, and then we can extend that network and even flex the network with our mesh nodes, just like you would with mesh Wi-Fi at home. So it really reduces the cost of deployment, the disruption, and future-proofs it to some extent. We had one deployment we're just starting here this month that, they're a large manufacturer of some building products where they often use different areas of these large campuses to store stuff, and there's no coverage. Wi-Fi doesn't really work outside. And the idea that they can simply find power, plug it in, and all of a sudden now they can keep all the data on their own network is really exciting for them. Because right now they have to have a cellular connected tablet with a corporate application, a VPN app, and it's sort of going through a public network and then back in the corporate network, and it creates all kinds of problems for them. So we help eliminate a lot of these challenges with the mesh solution.
Interesting. And to reiterate what I mentioned in my intro, GXC focuses its services on a lot of heavy industry, including extractive industries, manufacturing, and the supply chain, the various touch points across the logistics, the larger logistics industry. Break down your view on how cellular mesh compares to trying to launch other private networks, and do you see cellular mesh being sort of the future for these industries compared to 5G private networks, 6G private networks, or a private Wi-Fi network, Wi-Fi 6 or higher, or is each one sort of playing its own role within these heavy industries? What are your thoughts?
You might have a little Wi-Fi hanging on the private cellular network because of legacy devices, but generally speaking, you're not gonna pull fiber a mile in a mine. I think the trucks might flatten that out pretty quickly too. You're not gonna pull fiber across miles of farmland. You're not, even pulling it in a warehouse can be really expensive. We had one person, one GM of this plant just spent $12 million pulling fiber for trying to put up a network. And this is just one heavy manufacturing plant. So again, it's the combination with the conventional network with the mesh that's the magic. But you're going to need some combination of this to really get full market adoption, because just like we started out by saying, it's not that any technology is great or bad, it's how well it fits a particular use case. And again, mesh isn't made for every last use case, but for what it does best, where it's just not practical for backhaul, where you need flexibility, future proofing, and it's just not realistic to put in fiber economically. It really, really shines, and that's I would say it's an accelerator in a lot of these situations.
So let's end on a big picture note, looking at some of the challenges that are going to shape the industry. So basically every major telecom player has some kind of wireless broadband solution, and they have a suite of wireless broadband solutions, right? 5G, Wi-Fi, looking into 6G, private versus, deploying public networks. What are some of the challenges in any of those buckets, the most important ones that you see wireless broadband providers facing in the near future? This could include things like spectrum availability, network congestion, you name it. And what are your thoughts, tips, and strategies for maneuvering some of these major coming challenges?
So again, it comes down to the use case. What is the need today? What is the need tomorrow? Really being able to plan out specifically what are the use cases that are driving a business case. And I think what we're going to see is the Wi-Fi technologies will continue to do their thing very well. They'll continue to evolve and get better. They'll continue to, everything new will have all the new technologies in. I had a really interesting conversation a couple weeks ago with let's say, top five exec from former top five exec with a multi-billion-dollar tech company, who told me that even after a year of war in Ukraine, the Russians still haven't cracked the cellular network. And I think security, just given all the crazy going on in the world with China, with Russia, other bad actors, security is stepping up in concern with all our enterprise customers. I think we've gotten 3 requests for sort of very detailed security analysis just in the past couple weeks. So luckily we've done the analysis, but so I think security was always something people talk about but never focused on. It's really becoming important, and so I think that's also going to drive some of these decisions of where you put Wi-Fi versus cellular, because the idea that you can really raise your security level, you can control your data, and you're taking stuff off a public network is a really compelling story for a lot of companies these days.
And then what's the most exciting thing that you're looking forward to for the industry, right? It could be anything. It could be a development to a technology. It could be a particular use case. It could be an industry. But what's getting you jittery for the future of this sort of next generation of wireless technologies in the broadband industry?
I'm a sucker for some of the visual stuff, like the augmented reality stuff. Not Obi-Wan, you're my only hope kind of stuff, but really more about we think about the baby boomers now are retiring at a rate that's never been experienced before, and sort of capturing and this is I think some of the critical goals of digital transformation is knowledge capture from this generation that's sort of starting to exit it in a hurry. And you really benefit from some of these advanced connectivity technologies to enable some of this augmented reality, AR, XR, in terms of training, maintenance. Some of the studies I'm seeing show that when you do the knowledge capture right, it super duper compresses the time it takes a new person, even the first time they're doing a new task. It's really amazing what these technologies, Terminator mode, that layer of information on top of the world. I'm not as big a fan as VR. The total virtual world, although it has its place for some training applications. But AR, I think, is enabled by some of these connectivity technologies, is really exciting. And then the other one I'd throw out is automation. We've been talking about automation for years, about, you can't go a day without seeing some robotic lawnmower, robotic dog, robotic this, robotic that. I can't get my wife to get the Roomba in the house, right? Although to be fair, they were selling all the mapping data of your house to third parties. I really think some of these new connectivity technologies finally make these autonomous robotic use cases a reality. And given also the secular demographic trends of lower birth rates, we're at only the beginning of a really massive employee shortage, where we have less potential people of working age every year. And so these sort of automation technologies, people are worried, oh, they're taking all the jobs. That's not the issue. The issue is there may not be enough humans to even keep the machines going. And so I think these connectivity technologies are really critical to enable these robotic automation technologies.
Well, we'll definitely have to keep an eye out for both of those developments, and we'll have to have you back on as soon as there's something juicy to break down. But till then, Allen, I think we'll go ahead and call it here. Allen Proithis, CEO of GXC, a cellular mesh solutions company. Thank you so much for joining us, giving us your perspectives here on the wireless revolution, how it's reshaping the broadband industry, giving us some actionable insights, analysis, and some tips and strategies as well for broadband players to maneuver all of these changes and how to make the most of each technology, right? Because I think the core takeaway here really is, pick the right technology for the right use case, these are all going to play a synergistic role in connecting our, increasing number of wireless connected devices. And so I think as broadband players, big or small, start to develop their, a more concrete solution portfolio for how to maneuver Wi-Fi, how to maneuver 5G, 6G, IoT ecosystems, private or public, you name it. I think remembering that, right, that each technology is playing a specific role rather than one necessarily supplanting the other and becoming the primo tech is going to be important for being intentional with, strategizing and supporting end users and clients as well. So again, Allen Proithis, CEO of GXC, thank you for your time. And if folks want to find out more about GXC and your cellular mesh solutions, how can they get in touch? Where can they learn more?
Real easy, gxc.io, gxc.io, and you'll find everything there.
Perfect. All right, Allen, thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to chatting more in the future. So we'll have you back on sometime soon. Till then, it's really been a pleasure.
All right, thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode of Wavelengths, an Amphenol Broadband Solutions podcast. If you like what you heard and saw today, and you want to catch up on all of our previous conversations, or you want to make sure that you don't miss out on future hard-hitting thought leadership on the evolving telecom and broadband industries, make sure that you're heading to our website, amphenolbroadband.com. Again, amphenolbroadband.com. And make sure that you're subscribing to Wavelengths on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Wavelengths.